Hello everyone and welcome to CRJ 111 Police and Society, Chapter 10, Police Administration. I'm Steve Martin, Professor of Criminal Justice here at Des Moines Area Community College, and we're going to be talking in Chapter 10 about the administrative processes regarding law enforcement agencies in America. These are agendas and our learning objectives. So let's talk about organizations. Organizations evolve for the purpose of meeting specific goals and objectives. Goals and objectives are used also in mission statements to try to guide the agency in, I guess it's goals, objectives, and missions. Goals are the long-term purposes of an agency, and goals tend to be more general in nature. Objectives are usually short-term and are more specific to the agency. Together, the goals and objectives are encompassed in a department mission statement. Mission statements offer directions for an agency. Police mission statements generally comment on serving and protecting, being accountable to the public, being ethical and honest, performing up to expectations and standards, things like that. This would be an organizational chart of a law enforcement agency, and you can see the primary components of a police organizational chart would include things like the operations component, which involves groups or divisions that actively and directly interact with the public, and also within this category are going to be the functions of patrol and traffic, criminal investigations, crime prevention specialists, juvenile school services, things like that. The administrative component performs functions in support of those in operations, and it influences also the internal structure of the department. These units comprise a wide array and variety of activities, including personnel, budgeting, training, internal affairs, public information, legal assistance, things like that. Things outside of what we would typically refer to as the organizational aspect. Max Weber came up with the idea of bureaucracy. What is a bureaucracy? What are the components of that? What are the goals and purposes of the bureaucratic process? It's going to be things like a hierarchy of authority where you actually have a chain of command. A chain of command working upward from the bottom and a chain of command working downward from the top. And basically what this hierarchy does is it guarantees that subordinates are controlled and overseen by supervisors. There's what's called a specified division of labor, kind of like we saw in our organizational chart. We have written rules in place that apply uniformly to all in the organization. There's impersonal relationships to avoid decision making based on bias or emotion, subjectivity, and selection and promotion are based on qualifications and competence. And this came about as a result of, if you remember back to the political era of policing, where a lot of promotions, decision making weren't necessarily based on qualifications and competence, but on political connections and the officer's ability to pay to be promoted in the organization. When we started to professionalize policing, then that is when we came up with the idea of bureaucracies and actually having rules in place to guide how a department operates. Also, the idea of negative consequences. There are some imitations to the bureaucratic model for police. There are 4 major negative consequences of the inability of police departments to deal with the limitations of the bureaucratic model. And some of these limitations are going to be that there might be an adversarial relationship between officers and supervisors. The creation of unions, creating conflict loyalties among supervisors and subordinates. If the patrol officers are in a labor union and supervisors are not, or they're in a separate union, then that could cause conflict between the two groups, especially when you're trying to take disciplinary action against an officer. Officers pursuing individualized or highly specialized career goals, this could be a conflict also as a result of that, and high turnover rates. The negative consequences of this is that morale could suffer, and that could result in people seeking employment somewhere else if they're not happy in their roles. So it's a very careful balancing act that has to be undertaken for this to be successful. The idea of PODS Corp. This is an acronym. If you take any management classes in criminal justice or law enforcement, there's 7 activities involved in administration of a police agency. Number 1 is planning. Number 2 is organizing. Number 3 is staffing. Number 4 is directing. Number 5 is coordinating. Number 6 is reporting. And number 7 is budgeting. So basically these 7 things are encompassed in what we call PODS Corp. And as a police administrator, even at the first line level as a sergeant, and as you rise up through the other ranks to middle management and upper management, most of your days are spent with these 7 things. And how well you do these things, how well you plan for future activities, how well you organize the people working there, how well you staff things. Are people in the most effective positions? How well you direct, telling people what to do, how well you coordinate, how well you communicate within the agency, the reporting aspect of things, the upward flow of communication, the downward flow, and finally, just how well things are budgeted. And budgets are very political in nature and are often based on previous year's performances and budgeting requests, and the need for monetary resources in certain places will have an effect on the following year's budget. Principles of management. To meet the goals of being an effective police department guided by productive leadership, police managers must abide by and perform the following principles. They got to be responsive. They have to be efficient. They have to constantly be regulating what's going on within the organization. They have to be restraining spending and subordinates so that people aren't overreacting or going overboard. They have to constantly be integrating new ideas and thought processes, as well as new people into new roles too. Recovering is something else that they do, and this entails the idea of having to maybe find new resources, maybe retool, if you will, to get some things done in the organization, changing ideas, but being resourceful, I think, is probably one of the main things there. Making sure that integrity guides everything that they do in the organization. The idea of saying something and sticking to it. Repressing the negative aspects of what's going on so that it doesn't interfere with the flow of the operation. Communicating. Obviously, this is one of the most important things in any organization, because in organizations where the grapevine is the most commonly used form of communication, those are the most unhealthy organizations, and they die on the vine. And then reinforcing the goals, objectives of the organization, and just reinforcing all of the things we've talked about here to make it an efficient and well-run operation. Leadership styles. They primarily talk about 3, but leadership's been defined in a lot of different ways. It generally refers to the ability to persuade or influence others to follow in the quest to meet specific goals and actions. There are bodies of theory that categorize and discuss leadership, and they can be organized according to trait theories. With trait theories, they focus on the individual traits of effective leaders. Traits like integrity, vision, communication skills, flexibility, intuition, the ability to see the big picture would be people according to this theory. Behavioral theories focus more on a style of management used by one as opposed to the traits inherent in, for instance, an individual. Okay, and then finally, situational theories. They involve leaders who adopt to changing or evolving situations. So, actually, the best leaders probably incorporate all three of these theories into one to be really effective leaders. Leadership theories can also be organized according to the leader-centered theory. They focus on a leader's personal traits, behaviors, characteristics, as well as their relationship with situational environments. They might include theories that address a leader's ability to meet the expectations of group members. The follower and context-centered theories include leadership theories pertaining to an individual's ability to adapt to varied situations. Also in this category would be things like the situational theory, contingency theory, and path-goal theory. Leader-follower interaction-centered theories emphasize the interactions between leaders and followers, superiors, subordinates, and groups like that. These would be the types of things that would be really based on interactions between groups of people to be most effective. Managerial styles, and again, these are pretty typical things that you might see, good or bad. The impoverished manager theory is one with a low concern for both people and production. The individual maybe is more simplistic than that, cannot see the big picture. The country club manager has a high concern for people, yet a low concern for production. Task style management has to do with demonstrating a high concern for production, yet a low concern for people. The bottom line is most important here. The middle of the road manager demonstrates a moderate concern for both people and production. And the team manager has a high concern for both production and people. And of course, everyone would like to work for, the team manager style. And so when we talk about management styles, we need to really stay focused as to what is most important here. Supervisory styles, using systematic observational data, patrol officers and first-line supervisors. 4 distinct supervisory styles have been identified. The traditional style of supervision, which largely incorporates measurable outcomes of police practices and aggressive enforcement. The innovative supervisor is generally more supportive of changes in policing and are characterized by having more officer friends, low task orientation, more positive views of subordinates. And again, these are people that, for a lot of varying reasons, have stayed up to date and have good positive outlooks on their job and those working for them and with them. The supportive supervisors have high levels of inspirational motivation. They tend to protect subordinates from unfair discipline or punishment and demonstrate low levels of concern for task orientation. The active supervisors are characterized by high levels of activity and positive views of subordinates. They tend to have high levels of perceived power and low levels of inspirational motivation. Would characterize those. Management style groups, as we wrap up here. Transformational leaders view themselves as considerate, personable, and charismatic. Social contract leaders tend to believe they're largely professional in their orientation to their work. Bureaucratic leaders perceive themselves as being bound by rules. They have to do everything according to the book. And the Machiavellian leaders believe they're personally maintained manipulative personality traits and a means-end managerial approach, which means that they have to get everybody to do everything for them, and if not, then they feel as though they have to do it themselves. Anyway, that wraps up Chapter 10. So again, this is Steve Martin, Professor of Criminal Justice.